Hello and welcome once again to Android Design in Action. I'm your host, Roman Urich.
Hey guys, my name's Adam Kosh.
And my name is Nick Butcher.
And we are back from hiatus. We took a nice long break to give ourselves some time to prepare for Google I/O 2013. And now that the conference is over, we now have a chance to talk about all the cool things that were announced, all the different sessions, all the wonderful design sessions that took place. And that's what we'll be doing today. So with that, let's just jump right in because we have a lot to cover since there was a lot that happened at I/O. So the first thing we want to do is look at all the different sessions that took place. There are a lot of design sessions this year. I don't know exactly how many, something like 7 or 8 or something, but they were all jam-packed with different bits of information on a variety of different topics, subtopics within design. So the first that we want to talk about is Rachel Garbs and Helena Rober's session, Enchant, Simplify, and Amaze Android's Design Principles. So, I mean, I guess like the way we should probably do this is we should each talk a little bit about how, what takeaways there were for us. For me, the big takeaway here was kind of the association of emotion, positive and negative emotions, from the session. The association of positive and negative emotions with kind of UIs and kind of how those play together. There's a lot of kind of interesting things about writing guide and things like that.
Yeah, and I guess for me, it's interesting because I think Rachel introduces the vision as a sort of being touchy-feely, and for me, it was always hard to sort of wrap my head around how that relates to design for myself because I'm more of a developer. And so I really like the examples that she gave, like actually showing how, like for example, one of the ones here is decide for me, but let me have the final say. Yeah, you can see there. So for example, when you're deleting a message, it deletes first and then there's an undo action rather than a dialogue.
Yeah, same for me. It's how they actually applied these, very, very snappy kind of principles, and how she showed how they actually help them inform their design decisions. So there's a section in there where they're assigning, marbles for things you do well, and bad marbles for things you do badly, and that really helps you to weigh up different design decisions. And I thought that was a really interesting technique.
Yeah, and they also mentioned very briefly the Android baseline study that we conducted about a year or two ago. That was kind of one of the foundations of a lot of these design principles. That's kind of, I think it's mentioned somewhere near the beginning. So it was really kind of a really good overview of the design principles, and I think that the closest page on our design guide to this session is obviously the Creative Vision Design Principles section, which kind of goes through all of them. So they went through that in excruciatingly good detail. So that was a good session. Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, sure.
Next was Agile UX Research Practice in Android. This was by Miki Kono and Bethany Fong. And so here they go through a bunch of different techniques that the Android team uses, as well as lots of different companies out there. A couple of different techniques for really lightweight, really cheap research, stuff that doesn't involve millions of dollars or thousands of dollars, whatever. It's stuff that you can basically do. Like one of my favorites was the cafe study. You go into like a Google cafe or into like a Starbucks or something, and you just show your app or show a very specific flow within your app to a few people and kind of measure their reactions in certain ways. So it's very, very lightweight and very quick, hence the name Agile.
Yeah, I'll admit I actually haven't got around to watching this particular session yet, but it's on my to-do list.
Yeah, these are each like 40 minutes or so. So I mean, it is a lot of content.
of sessions to watch.
Yeah, I like the way that they laid out the traditional research process. And it's like this stage followed by this stage followed by this stage, and then it said, but there's no way that's going to work in the Android world where the pace of mobile app development is just too agile. And they can really compress it down. So I thought it was really, really interesting how you can, they stressed how important to do research is, but showed how to do it in an agile way. It was really, really, really great.
Yeah, and in the very beginning, they had this kind of list of, I guess this grid, not really a grid, I guess a chart of the different techniques that you could use. And they focused more on the qualitative and behavior side of things, so right around here. They didn't really spend too much time talking about the other stuff because sometimes it can cost more. Some of it is kind of outside of the scope of kind of a small research team. So definitely, if you're interested in this kind of area, this general area of UX research, they talk about a whole bunch of techniques. And here, I think the major 4 techniques they talk about. They actually also spent a lot of time on the pulse study. I think they went into the most detail about this pulse study. So yeah, UX research. The next session was cognitive science and design, and this is one of my favorites. Alex is a tremendously good speaker. He was on the show in the, I think it was the, what was it, the notifications? There's notifications and something else.
Google Now,
design process. Yeah.
Google Now
Google
design
Now.
process, yeah.
Yeah, so he was on the show and he talked about that, and he's a tremendously good speaker, and he did a session on cognitive science and design. So he mentioned a couple of things, the Gestalt principles. He mentioned things like proximity closure, etc. We could see here this kind of triangle and so on. This is actually really important because it's one of the fundamental bases of the Holo visual language, kind of this use of space and typography to communicate hierarchy and structure. You can kind of see that, right? Even without a whole bunch of lines, you can still make an association or kind of form a mental model of the relationship between these different groups of circles, right? So it's kind of one of the fundamental bases for the Holo visual language. So it's kind of a good session for that.
Yeah, I think I was saying to Roman, this session, regardless of Android or design or anything else, is just really, really interesting to watch. And one particular slide I liked, and I don't think we have it here, but it had a bunch of different shapes, and then they were colored in different colors as well. And he sort of showed how the colors are very easy to spot the differentiation, but the shapes are not. So again, it applies back to sort of the Holo visual language, using spacing and contrast and colors to differentiate.
Yeah, and he also mentioned affordances, and I actually really like this slide. There was the previous slide that showed a bunch of similar looking trash cans with different colors, and then this slide showed trash cans with different colors, obviously, but also different slots, and that kind of, they afford different types of things being put inside them. So this is kind of like a more effective type of trash/recycling combination. And one other that I really liked was a slide about peripheral vision. So he used this really funny analogy of kind of like a tiger, or you walk into a room, a test study, and the first thing you see is a tiger. And they kind of did this study or something, or I guess this is based on a study. Your response time to things right in front of you is actually slower than your response time to things around you. And so kind of your peripheral vision is very important, and that's actually one of the reasons that a lot of things on Android are near the corners and edges of the screen rather than in the very dead center. And I think
just watch the talk, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's really good.
Really good.
It's really, really good. Oh, one last thing I wanted to mention, since this talk is so good. He also talked about recognition. So like your ability to recognize people's faces and versus their names. Your ability to recognize their faces is something like almost constant time. Like within 100 people, you'll instantly recognize your friends, versus in a list of 100 names, it'll take you a while to find like your friends' names. So really kind of interesting tidbits here and there. Probably spent a lot of time on this, and let's just move on. The next session was also very, very good. It was by Jens Nagel and Rich Fulcher on the Android user experience team. They're both interaction designers. And this session, they basically covered navigation and really more higher level structure. So rather than looking at an app as a set of pixels or a set of individual screens, they looked at it as a whole, and they talked about different types of I guess they use this kind of use case modeling practice to look at or to plan out or map out an application. So they went into a little bit of depth on this kind of barkeeper app, where they basically looked at different people and their different use cases and mapped them out in this kind of, not really a flow chart, but more like a diagram. And this helped them kind of make decisions about what navigation structures they should use in the app.
One of my favorite bits of this talk is where they explain some of the design decisions behind some of the Google or Android stock apps like the calendar and so forth. So they went through the process of how they arrived at the particular navigation structure they use, and showed variations and why they wouldn't work and so forth, which was really interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was just really useful how they show, I think it was several examples where they show what an app could look like with tabs, with the spinner, with the drawer. I don't know if they show examples of the six-pack or dashboard patterns, but
it was almost never the proper choice.
It was never turned out to be worthwhile selecting. But I thought it was really useful just because it applies to any app. You could sort of go through these different iterations and see how it would work with these different patterns. And certainly there's pros and cons to each of them, which I think was the takeaway.
Yeah, and I really like how they kind of separate out the structure into, or they have a couple of common patterns for recognizing structure, right? So they look at apps that may have a specific focus, like one of the top level sections is the most important, and then apps that are very deep, where they have kind of like an equal weighting of sections, but each section itself is very deep. And then they look at another kind of type of pattern or structural pattern where an app is very, very interconnected, which is this case. So it's really kind of a good way of structuring or thinking about your app, rather than thinking about its features or the individual components. Think about it as a whole. Like, what are the different types of use cases that you're trying to solve for different users?
And then, of course, they spent a fair amount of time talking about the navigation drawer pattern as well. Mm-hmm. So this is, and I think Jens made an excellent point about how this is a community pattern that's emerged, and how we've spent our time kind of taking a look at all the different community implementations and what works well and what we felt could be improved slightly, and how we've gestated on that process and really put a lot of thought and effort into providing some guidance that we can hope will really make solidify this space, so people have some stability of expectations of how this works.
Exactly. Yeah, so the navigation drawer was one of those patterns that was introduced in Jens and Rich's talk, and Nick and I covered it later, which we'll talk about. But definitely, we'll probably do another full episode of ADA on just the navigation drawer at some point.
Certainly a lot of demand for that, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so moving on. Then Nick and I did a session called Android Design for UI Developers. And this was kind of more like a developer talk. It wasn't really so much for designers, but I think especially Nick's part, the responsive design area, this was incredibly useful for both designers and developers. So at a very high level, we covered navigation. We covered how to implement the navigation drawer, for example. Then Nick did a whole big bit on responsive design techniques, and Nick, I'm sure you want to talk about that here. And then I finished off with implementing the Holo visual language, like how to implement dividers and touch feedback and different things like that.
Yeah, I took the opportunity of having the stage at IA to talk about one of my favorite topics is responsive design. So I went about it by talking about some of the limitations of the kind of scalable approach, and discuss some strategies you can use to really to deal with that, to cope with it.
Yeah, it's very, very good information, especially for developers. So if you're a designer and your developers come back to you and say, oh, that's going to take too long and I don't know how to do it, whatever, just point them to this session. There's a lot of good information here.
Yeah, I have nothing else to add other than go watch this session. It's good though.
All right. So next we had, really quickly, two things that we, again, talked about for developers, the navigation drawer, and then Nick talked about sliding pane layout, which is a sort of new presentation for master detail views. And Google Hangouts is an example of an app that uses this, where basically on a phone, it's a single pane that kind of slides off the screen to reveal the master pane. And on a tablet, they're both visible at the same time. There's obviously a lot more detail to that pattern there. But in case you're a developer and looking to implement that, basically look at the navigation drawer guide here with this link at the top. And then the sliding pane layout link is kind of a link to the reference. There's no actual design guide topic for sliding panes right now, but that's kind of the best place to look at for basic information about it. Obviously in the session as well. Yeah, so for those watching, our awesome producer, Anirudh, has just told us that Nick's audio is yet again on only the left channel. Sorry about that. If you can't hear Nick and only one ear is plugged in, just switch to the other ear. Sorry about that. We'll fix that for next time.
Am I speaking at the corner of my mouth again? Or something?
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, so next, so this is actually an interesting one. An Engineer's Pragmatic Guide to Design from Braden Cowitz. I heard about this, but there's still no video up, so we can't
we all heard good things, but there's no video up, so we haven't had a chance to watch it because we couldn't attend in person. So
yeah,
looking forward to watching.
It looks really good. Yeah. That's all I can say. But just check out this link down here at the bottom. I'm sure the YouTube video will be posted at some point. It's just a matter of time. But yeah, probably going to be a really good session. Or if it was a really good session and you were there, feel free to say so in the comments. And then there was another session from some YouTube folks on designing products for a multi-screen world, the YouTube perspective. I think this is from Tom Broxton and Josh Sassoon. Hope that's right. And my favorite thing about this was actually these kind of charts. they basically did a whole bunch of research into how people use their devices. So this wasn't an Android-specific talk. This is basically looking at Android, iPhone, TV, iPad, Android tablets.
Every screen that you could possibly.
Yeah, basically every screen that's
consume content.
Yeah, and so they created these kind of like little diagram journals of how people used their devices. So this is basically like a time graph where I think it's just kind of a full day. And they just highlighted the portions where people were using their devices. And so they made kind of little observations around, like, people mostly use their phones throughout the entire day, kind of snacking a little bit at a time, whereas at the TV portion of your usage was more towards the night time, obviously, with very, very kind of heavy, I guess, continuous portions. So kind of some of these charts were very interesting to watch, and they've definitely made some good observations.
I'm yet to see it yet, but I think it's a really interesting space as well, how we deal with the multi-device, like when everyone has all these different devices. I think it's really interesting.
Oh, another thing that was really good about this is that so YouTube is obviously a very popular brand, and one of the things that's very important to them is maintaining their brand across different platforms. And there's especially a part at the end where they talked about, how do they reconcile their brand with the platform. And I think it was Tom that mentioned this, but he's basically like, we want to be true to our brand, and we want to be true to the platform, but we don't want to sacrifice one over the other. So like, if you're working with somebody or product managers or developers that are thinking, we really need, or designers, that we really need this to be fully brand consistent, there are definitely kind of ways to achieve that while not, not letting kind of platform conventions stop you or anything like that.
Yeah, it's a very common question we get asked around that. So.
Yeah, and I think we want to do another session just on this at some point.
I think we should do an entire show on that subject.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. So, all right, so moving on from the sessions, those are just some of the sessions. I think there are probably more, and design was probably mentioned in more areas. But we also had a few labs, or I guess workshops at I/O that were related to design. The first was from Nazmul and Isabel, UX design for developers. So this is a very, very popular workshop, and it was actually, I think it was so popular and there was too much overflow, I guess, too many people trying to get in that couldn't, that they actually had to redo the session. They did 2 versions of the session just to fit the demand. So this is an incredibly popular session. They also talked about use cases, just like Rich and Jens did in their talk. They also talked about personas, so basically the process of doing some high-level UX, I guess thinking through the UX for your product, thinking about who's using it, and then thinking through the different use cases and prioritizing them. So basically they went through the process, I think, of doing this for a pizza ordering type app, and it is basically a lot of folks just wireframing and diagramming out on paper. So as you can see,
a quick note on these labs. Unfortunately, these labs weren't recorded, and so you won't be able to watch it. But some materials might be available if you want to work through the lab in your own time.
Yeah. So these links here aren't to videos. These links at the bottom are to the materials. So for this UX design for developers lab, this link actually points you to, I think is a developerslife.com or developerlife.com/UX. They started kind of like a blog and also a Google Plus community just for this project, and it's very, very popular. So if you're interested in kind of UX design, if you're interested in learning about it, definitely this is a very good beginner, I guess, guide to it. Moving on, then Nick, Adam, and I, we also ran our Android Design in Action Live lab, and this is also quite popular. We only did one of these, but basically what we did is we kind of took an alternative approach to a very similar problem. Rather than doing the standard classical personas and use cases stuff, we thought about it a little more from an engineering standpoint. Different objects you work with, the different kind of connections between them, and the different ways to group screens and such. And so for about 2 hours, folks came to the session, or came to the lab. They worked in with pencil and paper, and we gave out sketch pads and things like that. And we just kind of had a whole bunch of fun going through the process of creating a mobile banking application for teenagers, which is kind of an interesting little problem there. But my favorite thing I'd say about this was these guys. I mean, everybody that was there, everybody that came, thanks for coming. One of my favorite things that happened was that we actually got together a whole bunch of folks from the design community. Like Taylor Ling was there. We had Lucas Rocha from Pattern, Walmer from Brazil. Whole bunch of folks were there as TAs, so they walked around and helped people as they had questions. What did you guys think of the experience of the live lab?
I thought it was really cool. I mean, it was definitely something we haven't done before. Like normally we're used to doing code labs at Google I/O. So it was something new and different. And I was just really impressed with all of the work that the attendees came up with at the end. So I think we may post some of those at some point.
Yeah, at some point.
We'll see how we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I made sure to capture the G+ profiles of all the winners. Well, the winners. I think we the TAs selected like 4 or 5 different apps to win. But
I'm
we didn't
pretty sure that during the lab you said they were all winners. You big cheese.
Oh, that's right. Well, they are all winners basically. It was really, really good. Like we had, I think this is a good photo of it. There were, I don't know, we said like we had time for 10 or 15 presentations, but at least 30 or 40 people came up to try to present their work, which is just kind of awesome.
Oh, and by the way, these were hand-sketched designs in the end. Some people did use their computers, but for the most part they were hand-sketched, which was really cool.
Yeah.
The two things I liked about the lab was, because this is a developer conference and we polled the audience, so it was primarily developers there. And we said, we want to introduce you to the concepts, how, you think through your application and sketch it all out rather than just, which I think a lot of people do is dive into the code too quickly and, build and invest a lot of time in something which they then won't throw away. So it was really interesting to get people thinking about sketching and thinking through the problem space a lot more, applying the design rigor a lot more before jumping into code, which is really interesting. And also, I want to second, it was great to meet a bunch of the people. So some of the really active people in the Android design community, so you might have seen them joining the ADIA Hangouts we've had a couple of times and posting on the G+ community on the hashtag ADIA and Android design. It was really great to meet those guys.
Yeah.
They rock.
Totally. Okay, so that was the lab. And again, if you're interested in running through it at home, just visit this link here and it points you to a Google Drive folder containing all the slides and everything. All right.
Is it j.mp/ADIA live?
Yeah, j.mp/ADIA live. All right, so I think that was it for I/O. Actually, oh wait, no, there was more. Did we miss? Oh no, that's right. That's part of the news. So there's more obviously with Google I/O 2013. We'll mention a couple of things about apps that were launched, Google apps that were updated. But actually, before we talk about the awesome ADIA Android app, any kind of parting thoughts for Google I/O 2013, the in-person experience?
For me, it was just great to see a heavier design focus than previous years, sort of especially on the Android side, of course.
Yeah.
And it was just a really great vibe there. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for those of you who didn't get to attend, there's a bunch of stuff that happens at I/O kind of that isn't recorded in the sessions and so on. So we were involved in a bunch of panels, for example, where we were meeting developers who were talking about, how they found success or their experience with Android. And one of the things that came through for me was the importance of Android design. A lot of businesses were saying, this is impacted numbers we care about, like install numbers and revenue and so on, because we've adopted the Android design principles. So I think it really shows the maturity of the Android user base out there and how they really appreciate a well-designed app.
Yeah, and actually some of that is captured in the Biz Dev Bytes video series that we published around the same time as I/O. So if you're interested in hearing kind of real-world product managers, designers, developers talk about their experience, not only with the design guide and using things like responsive design, but also just with the impact of those types of things, those kind of technical changes, the impact on that on their kind of key numbers, the things that they care about. Definitely check out the Biz Dev Bytes series on Android Developers, the YouTube channel. So, yeah. My parting thought is, it was obviously awesome to meet everybody again. It's always kind of stressful for folks on the Android team, or I guess anybody working at Google that's staffing I/O to take care of. But I think this year more than other years, it was a little more relaxed, and I was definitely able to engage more in kind of friendly conversations with developers rather than jumping around between different places. So it was definitely an awesome conference. If you didn't get to attend this year, definitely try to attend next year. And here's to Google I/O 2014. All right, so let's talk about the ADIA Android app. So I'm gonna butcher his name, unfortunately. Andreas Stutz, is that right?
Yeah.
So sorry if we pronounced it wrong, Andreas. Really sorry, but this app is awesome.
It's top notch. It's really good.
We actually have it here. I'm just really gonna quickly switch over to it. So this is the app. It basically lets you look at past episodes of ADIA. Lets you look at all the slides. Lets you watch the videos.
It notifies you of upcoming shows.
Are you playing an episode of ADIA in ADIA?
Yeah, let's see if we can do the Inception.
Let's see if we can do the current one that's... Oh my god.
Oh, yeah.
It's working!
Oh, but it's a bit delayed, so we don't see the screen of the screen and the screen.
Yeah, so you can basically watch Android Design in action. You can also participate in some of the Google Plus conversation, Google Plus activity on Android Design and #ADIA, and it's just an overall well-built app too. So it's just a good example of a well-built, responsively designed Holo app. It's just awesome app all around. Definitely recommend downloading it.
So thank you, Andreas. It's been really useful for me. So a bunch of people, they come up and asking for design feedback, and I can say, hey, oh yeah, we talked about this on ADIA, and I can pull up my tablet and pull up the redesign very easily. So it's been phenomenal to be able to have that.
Yeah, for sure. So next, this new tool called, this old existing tool, Scala Preview. First of all, it now has an Android version, so you can actually mirror what's on your computer to your Android device. Very similar to the to Android Design Preview, the tool that we talked about, I think a few weeks ago. But this is now free, and it also works over Wi-Fi. So basically, almost the same thing as Android Design Preview, but it works over Wi-Fi. It probably has a few other features. I haven't used it myself, but it's definitely good if you're a designer and interested in seeing kind of real world scenarios, how your designs look on those devices. So it's now free. Go ahead and get it. And then Cyril. So actually, one of the things that maybe
we should jump to the apps first.
Yeah, let's do this one first. So there are a couple of new app updates that came around the time of Google I/O. The first, and I guess the biggest to me, is the Google Play Music redesign. So this is first of all, we launched Google Play Music All Access, which is kind of it's a monthly subscription. You get whatever music. And as part of that launch, we also updated this new UI. I think one of the best things about this is that, first of all, it uses new patterns and things like that. It's obviously a very responsive app. It has a very clean.
Got the drawer.
It's got the drawer, yeah. But it's also it's filled with interesting design touches, like fading semi-translucent action bars and lots of different swipeable panels. It's just really cool overall.
I think it's a phenomenal app. It has got, like you say, some design flourishes in there that they've really thought through all the minute and details. That it's worth spending a good 20 minutes, half an hour playing with it.
Did we lose Nick? Nick seems to have frozen up.
All right, well, we'll keep going.
Yeah, so what Nick said.
Yeah.
And there was also Google Hangouts, which is a new app, obviously, and it's kind of like it's a messaging type app. It lets you kind of communicate with people via, obviously pictures, text, and video using Video Hangouts. But it's a new app, and it uses that sliding pane layout that we talked about earlier. And there are a whole bunch of other updates. So there's obviously the I/O 2013. Nick is back. Thanks for coming, Nick. Sorry to have lost you the first time. There's obviously also the Google I/O application, which will be open sourced at some point. The Google Plus app got updates. A whole bunch of updates across the board. The Play apps, especially Play Music, Play Books, Play Magazines, they've kind of gotten this new consistent visual styling across the board,
which matches Google Play Store. Oh,
yeah.
Lost Nick.
And
there.
Nick's lost again.
All right.
But anyway, so the reason we wanted to talk about this really quickly is that one of those design touches is this kind of fading semi-translucent action bar. And Cyril Mathieu actually created or wrote up a blog post on how to do this in your own apps. So here's just a very quick presentation. Here's a quick kind of couple of screenshots of what it actually looks like.
And I think he's got a sample APK you can just go and install if
Yeah.
you want to actually play with it, because I think you have to see it in motion to really sort of understand it. But
Yeah.
And then someone else has also turned it into a library on GitHub if you want to.
Yeah.
great stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll link up at some point. But the idea is that, I mean, you have this kind of transparent action bar that shows content at the top, but as soon as you start scrolling, it becomes solid. So it's a very cool effect. Definitely, worth considering for one of your apps. So that was that, and then I think this may be the last one. The last one is, and this is I think a few weeks old, but in case you're interested in using some of the the action bar icon pack icons, so like refresh and share and things like that. In case you don't want to necessarily use the Illustrator version or the Photoshop version, there's like a million different versions available. There's now a font for this, so you basically just install this font. It's kind of like Wingdings or Webdings or Symbol or whatever, but you can just type in the right character and you instantly get that icon. So yeah, I think
It's kind of handy if you're doing some wireframes or something like that. If you want to do some high fidelity wireframes and you want to do an action bar action with an icon and text, you can do it really easily.
Yeah, it's one way to just improve or speed up your workflow and just really streamline your process. So it's very cool. Okay, so I think that's it. That's all the time we have today.
Yep.
That was a kind of a whiz-bang tour of Google I/O 2013, the different sessions that we had, the different labs that took place, and also some of the news that came out of that, as well as some of the news around that time. So thanks for joining, and again, we're probably going to try to get back into our regular cadence of Android Design in Action episodes. Sorry for the very long hiatus, but we're now free. We have nothing else to do. Just kidding. But yeah, so hope to see you next week or the week after or whatever. So thanks. I'm Roman Urich.
See you later, guys. My name's Adam Kosh.
Thanks very much from Nick Butcher.
Later, guys.
Bye.
Bye.